There's a moment most men recognize instantly. It's subtle at first. The replies become shorter. The enthusiasm softens. Plans feel less certain. Nothing dramatic happens.
No argument. No confrontation.
Just a quiet shift in energy. For Ethan, that shift began on an ordinary Wednesday evening. Ethan was 31, working as a civil engineer in a growing inland city. His life was structured, steady, and productive. He had been seeing a woman named Lila, 28, a graphic designer who worked remotely and enjoyed a more flexible lifestyle. They had been spending time together for a few months, nothing officially defined, but consistent enough to feel meaningful. In the beginning, Lila's attention felt effortless. She initiated conversations. She suggested places to go. She laughed easily. The dynamic felt balanced. But slowly, something changed. Lila began responding hours later instead of minutes. She became busy more often. When they met, she seemed present, but slightly distant, as if part of her attention was elsewhere. Ethan felt it immediately. And like most men in that position, his mind went into analysis mode. Did I say something wrong? Did I act too confident? Too distant? Too available? He replayed recent conversations in his head. He reread old messages. He tried to locate the exact moment the shift occurred. But here's what most men don't understand. When a woman pulls away, the biggest mistake isn't what you did before. It's how you respond now. At first, Ethan chose the common reaction. He increased effort. He texted first more often. He suggested new plans. He tried to be lighter, funnier, more engaging. When Lila seemed quiet, he filled the silence. When she delayed responses, he responded instantly once she did reply. On the surface, this looks like care. But underneath, it communicates something else. It says, I feel the distance, and I'm afraid of losing this. And fear subtly shifts power. Lila didn't consciously decide to value Ethan less. But she did begin to feel less emotional tension. Because tension requires uncertainty. And Ethan removed uncertainty by overcompensating. One Friday evening, Ethan invited Lila to a small social gathering with friends. She said she might come but wasn't sure. A few hours before the event, she canceled politely, saying she felt tired. Ethan replied kindly. But inside, something unsettled him. He realized he was starting to adjust his mood based on her availability. That realization hit harder than the canceled plan, because it meant he was no longer centered in his own life. This is the turning point most men miss. When she pulls away, your instinct says, move closer. But emotional strength says, stabilize. The next week, Ethan did something different. He didn't ignore Lila. He didn't become cold. He didn't play games. He simply stopped overextending. If she texted, he replied calmly, without urgency. If she suggested plans, he agreed if it fit his schedule. If she seemed distant, he didn't interrogate it. He redirected his attention back to his work projects, his gym routine, and his long-postponed certification exam. And something interesting happened. The anxiety that had been building in him started fading. Because anxiety thrives on waiting for validation. Once Ethan stopped seeking it, his emotional balance returned. Lila noticed the shift too. Not immediately, but gradually. She realized Ethan wasn't filling space anymore. He wasn't checking in excessively. He wasn't adjusting his tone to maintain interest. And that created a new kind of awareness in her. When he became less reactive, she became more observant. This is where many misunderstand attraction. Attraction often grows in the space where effort is mutual, not one-sided. When Ethan stopped compensating for the imbalance, he wasn't punishing Lila. He was restoring equilibrium. One evening, Lila reached out with more warmth than she had shown in weeks. She asked about his exam preparation. She suggested meeting at a new cafe she wanted to try. Ethan agreed, but without the internal rush he once felt. Because now, whether she leaned in or not, his foundation didn't depend on it. That's the difference between chasing and choosing. Chasing says, please don't leave. Choosing says, if you want to be here, show it. And the second energy is always stronger. This doesn't guarantee that she will come closer. Sometimes she won't. Sometimes distance becomes permanent. But here's the truth most men need to hear. If a woman pulls away and you respond with panic, you confirm her doubt. If she pulls away and you respond with stability, you create clarity. Ethan learned that strength in relationships isn't about control. It's about emotional self-possession. When he stopped trying to manage Lila's interest and started managing his own focus, the dynamic changed. Not because he manipulated anything, but because he reclaimed his center. And when a man stands firmly in his own life, people either step forward or step aside. Both outcomes are victories. When distance appears in a relationship, most men don't react with anger. They react with confusion. And confusion often leads to one instinct. Let me just ask what's wrong. On the surface, that seems mature.
Direct. Honest.
But depending on the emotional tone behind it, that question can quietly reduce attraction instead of restoring connection. Marcus learned this the slow way. Marcus was 34, a financial analyst living in a busy metropolitan district. Structured, disciplined, and thoughtful, he valued clarity in every area of his life. He had been dating Ava, 30, a marketing consultant with a fast-moving social circle and an unpredictable schedule. At first, their rhythm felt effortless. Conversations flowed. Plans were made in advance. There was laughter, curiosity, and shared momentum. Then, gradually, Ava's energy shifted. She wasn't rude. She wasn't cold. She was simply less present. Her responses became polite rather than engaged. Her availability became inconsistent. Her tone felt neutral instead of warm. Marcus felt the shift immediately. And because he valued communication, he did what many logical men do. He addressed it. One evening, after noticing another delayed reply and a canceled plan, he called her. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "You seem different lately." Ava paused. "Nothing's wrong," she said lightly. "I've just been busy." The conversation ended calmly.
No argument. No tensión.
But something subtle had changed. Marcus didn't feel reassured. He felt smaller. Because beneath his question wasn't calm curiosity. It was fear of losing control of the connection. And women are highly sensitive to emotional positioning. The issue wasn't that Marcus asked for clarity. The issue was that he asked from a place of imbalance. When reassurance is requested from insecurity, it doesn't rebuild attraction. It highlights instability. After that conversation, Marcus found himself monitoring her behavior even more closely. If she replied quickly, he felt relief. If she replied slowly, his mood shifted. If she used fewer emojis, he noticed. He had unintentionally handed over emotional control. This is the trap. Seeking reassurance feels like strength. But repeated reassurance-seeking communicates doubt. And doubt changes dynamics. Ava didn't suddenly lose respect for Marcus. But she began to feel something different. Less tension. Less mystery. Less challenge. Because Marcus had made it clear that her distance unsettled him. And once someone knows they can destabilize you, even unintentionally, the power balance shifts. Weeks later, Marcus caught himself rereading their old conversations, comparing tone and frequency. That's when he recognized something uncomfortable. He was trying to manage her interest instead of managing his focus. And that realization created a turning point. Instead of asking again whether everything was okay, he changed his strategy. He stopped seeking verbal reassurance. He started observing behavior. If Ava canceled plans, he didn't question it. He simply filled his schedule elsewhere. If she responded slowly, he didn't follow up. He matched the pace naturally. If she showed enthusiasm, he reciprocated calmly. No games.
No punishments.
Just alignment. And the internal shift mattered more than the external one. Marcus redirected his energy back to himself. He increased his training sessions. He reconnected with old friends. He focused on a new professional certification he had delayed for months. Gradually, something happened. The emotional dependency faded. Because reassurance only feels necessary when your stability depends on someone else's consistency. Once Marcus rebuilt internal stability, the need to check in disappeared. Ava began to notice the change. He wasn't asking for clarity anymore. He wasn't probing her mood. He wasn't adjusting himself to maintain engagement. He seemed grounded. And grounded energy feels different. It doesn't chase reassurance. It evaluates alignment. One evening, Ava reached out with unexpected enthusiasm. "Hey, are you free this weekend? I found a rooftop place I think you'd like." Marcus agreed, but he didn't over-celebrate the shift. He remained steady, because the lesson had already been learned. Reassurance doesn't create attraction. Consistency does. And consistency can't be forced through conversation. It reveals itself through behavior. Here's what most men misunderstand. If someone's interest is fading, no amount of verbal clarification will restore it. You cannot negotiate desire. You can only observe whether it exists. Marcus stopped asking, "Are we okay?" and started asking himself, "Is this balanced?" That question changed everything. Because once you evaluate balance instead of chasing comfort, your decisions become clearer. If Ava leaned in consistently, he would invest. If she remained inconsistent, he would adjust accordingly. No confrontation required.
No emotional pleading. Just quiet standards.
And standards are powerful because they don't need to be announced. They are enforced through behavior. Eventually, Ava's effort became more consistent. Not because Marcus pressured her, but because his stability reintroduced uncertainty. And uncertainty, when healthy, restores tension. But even if she hadn't leaned in, Marcus was prepared. Because the goal was never to win her back. The goal was to remain centered. This is the lesson most men must internalize. The moment you seek reassurance repeatedly, you signal doubt in your own value. The moment you observe quietly instead, you regain power. Attraction thrives in strength, not in constant clarification. And strength isn't loud. It's steady. When a woman becomes distant, most men make one of two mistakes. They either chase harder, or they withdraw emotionally out of frustration. But there is a third option, one that doesn't rely on reaction at all. It's redirection. Not away from her in bitterness, but back toward yourself in strength. Julian discovered this lesson at 29. He lived in a coastal city where life moved fast and competition was everywhere. He worked as a software developer for a growing startup, balancing deadlines, side projects, and the quiet pressure to constantly improve. He had been seeing Elena, 27, a photographer who traveled frequently for assignments and had a spontaneous, creative lifestyle. In the beginning, their differences felt exciting. Julian admired her freedom. Elena appreciated his stability. But as weeks turned into months, the rhythm shifted. Elena began postponing plans more often. She stopped initiating conversations. Her energy felt divided, sometimes warm, sometimes distracted. Julian noticed it, and unlike who he used to be, he didn't immediately react. Because he had learned something important from a past relationship. The moment you make someone your emotional focus, you lose momentum in your own life. Still, awareness doesn't erase discomfort. There were evenings when Julian stared at his phone longer than he wanted to admit. When Elena's delayed responses created subtle tension in his chest. When uncertainty tempted him to do something to fix it. But instead of confronting her or compensating with extra effort, he made a different decision. He expanded his world. Julian signed up for a weekend coding workshop he had been postponing. He returned to early morning training sessions at the gym. He began reconnecting with two friends he hadn't seen in months. None of these actions were strategies to make Elena jealous. They were corrections. Because, without realizing it, he had started shrinking his schedule around her availability. And shrinking your life to fit someone else's interest is always costly. As Julian's focus widened, something shifted internally. He stopped measuring his day by whether she reached out. He stopped checking message timestamps. He stopped replaying conversations. Not because he didn't care, but because he had regained direction. Direction is powerful. When a man has momentum in his own life, he becomes less reactive to emotional fluctuations. Elena noticed the difference. At first, subtly. Julian wasn't as instantly available as before. When she suggested spontaneous late-night plans, He sometimes declined, not harshly, just honestly. Can't tonight. Early morning tomorrow, he would say calmly. There was no resentment in his tone.
No passive aggression.
Just boundaries. And boundaries create contrast. Elena began asking more questions about his projects. She became curious about the workshop he attended. She commented on how focused he seemed lately. Here's the paradox most men miss. When you stop centering someone, they become more aware of you. Not because you're playing games, but because energy shifts. Julian wasn't trying to pull away. He was simply no longer orbiting around her unpredictability. And that stability created tension again. One afternoon, Elena invited him to an art exhibit she was participating in. In the past, Julian would have rearranged everything to attend. This time, he checked his schedule first. I can come for an hour before my meeting, he said. He showed up. He was present, supportive, engaged. Then he left when he said he would.
No overextensión.
No lingering in hopes of extra validation. And that single action communicated more strength than any conversation could. Because focus signals value. The more you invest in yourself, the less dependent you are on someone else's emotional fluctuations. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. Elena became more consistent. She initiated plans in advance. She responded with warmth. She showed clearer investment. Julian noticed, but he didn't overreact. Because by then, he understood the core principle. Self-improvement is not a tactic. It's insulation. When your identity is built around your goals, discipline, friendships, and growth, you don't collapse when someone becomes distant. You evaluate. If they align, you continue. If they drift, you remain steady. This is what emotional independence looks like. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't chase. Many men believe focusing on themselves is a way to win her back. That mindset is flawed. The real purpose of redirecting your focus is to win yourself back. Because the moment you obsess over someone's inconsistent attention, you abandon your own progress. Julian didn't know whether Elena would fully lean back in. But that uncertainty no longer controlled him. And ironically, that is what made him more attractive. Attraction is rarely rebuilt through persuasion. It's rebuilt through perception. When a woman sees that your life moves forward regardless of her fluctuations, she must decide. Does she step into that momentum? Or does she fall behind it? Either way, you continue advancing. This is the quiet power of redirection. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't involve ultimatums. It's simply a shift of energy from external validation to internal progress. And that shift changes everything. Because once you become the center of your own life again, you stop fearing distance. Distance either closes or it confirms misalignment. Both outcomes bring clarity. And clarity is always better than chasing uncertainty. There comes a point in every uncertain connection where effort is no longer the question. Clarity is. You've stopped chasing. You've stopped seeking reassurance. You've redirected your focus back to your own growth. And yet, something still feels unbalanced. This is where most men hesitate. Because the final step isn't about doing more. It's about deciding whether to stay. Nathan reached that point at 33. He lived in a quieter suburban area outside a large city, working as a project manager for a logistics company. His life was structured and disciplined. He valued stability, forward planning, and steady progress. He had been seeing Camille, 29, a travel coordinator whose lifestyle was more fluid and spontaneous. Their connection started naturally, shared humor, similar values about ambition, mutual curiosity. But over time, the pattern became inconsistent. Camille would show strong interest for a week, initiating conversations, suggesting plans, speaking about future ideas. Then, without conflict, she would drift. Replies slowed. Plans became uncertain. Her tone felt polite but detached. Nathan handled the early shifts differently than he might have in his 20s. He didn't argue. He didn't pressure. He didn't try to secure guarantees. He matched energy calmly. When she leaned in, he reciprocated. When she pulled back, he refocused on his work, his fitness routine, his friends. But after several cycles of this pattern, the realization settled in. Consistency wasn't improving. It was fluctuating. And fluctuation creates instability. Nathan sat with an uncomfortable truth. He could continue accepting inconsistency. Or he could demand alignment quietly. Not through confrontation. Through decision. This is the moment that defines strength. Walking away is not about anger. It's not about ego. It's not about punishment. It's about standards. Many men fear that walking away means losing something valuable. But what they're often losing is uncertainty, not value. Nathan asked himself a simple question. If nothing changes, am I satisfied with this dynamic long term? The honest answer was no. That clarity removed fear. Because once you know what you want, indecision fades. One evening, Camille canceled plans again, citing exhaustion from work. Her explanation was reasonable.
Calm.
Polite. In the past, Nathan would have reassured her, rescheduled immediately, and minimized his own disappointment. This time, he responded differently. I understand. Take care of yourself, he replied. And then he didn't push for another date. He didn't suggest an alternative time. He didn't reopen the conversation later that night. He simply continued with his week. Not to create scarcity, but to observe reality. Days passed. Camille didn't initiate contact. That silence gave Nathan the answer he needed. He didn't send a dramatic message. He didn't accuse her of inconsistency. He didn't explain his reasoning in detail. He simply reduced his investment to match hers. And when she eventually reached out casually a week later, "Hey stranger, how have you been?" His response was polite but different. "I've been good. Focusing on a few projects lately." There was no resentment, but there was distance. Because willingness to walk away creates a shift in posture. Camille sensed it. For the first time, she felt uncertainty. Not because Nathan was playing games, but because he was no longer emotionally anchored to her unpredictability. This is the paradox. The moment you truly accept losing someone, you stop behaving in ways that push them away. Desperation disappears. Overcompensation fades. Emotional pressure dissolves. You become calm. And calm is powerful. Camille eventually asked directly, "You seem different lately. Is everything okay?" Nathan didn't accuse. He didn't criticize. He answered honestly. "I value consistency. I don't expect perfection. But I need balance. If that's not where this is going, I respect that. I just won't force it."
No ultimatums. No emotional theatrics.
Just clarity. For Camille, that was confronting. Because now the dynamic was defined. She could either step into alignment or accept the distance growing between them. And here is the critical truth. Nathan was prepared for either outcome. That preparation is what made his position strong. Walking away is only powerful when it's genuine. If you threaten to leave but secretly hope she stops you, that's negotiation. If you are at peace with the outcome, that's strength. Over the next 2 weeks, Camille made more effort than she had in months. She initiated plans in advance. She followed through. Her engagement became steady. Not because Nathan pressured her, but because she recognized that access to him was no longer automatic. And when something is no longer guaranteed, its value increases. But here's the deeper lesson. Even if Camille had chosen not to step forward, Nathan would have been fine. Because he wasn't walking away from her. He was walking toward alignment. And alignment always feels lighter than chasing. Many men believe power in relationships comes from control. It doesn't. It comes from self-respect. From knowing that your time, energy, and emotional presence are investments, not entitlements. When you are willing to leave calmly, you stop tolerating patterns that drain you. And when you stop tolerating misalignment, 2 things happen. The wrong person fades, or the right person steps up. Either way, you win. Because you kept your standards. And a man who protects his standards protects his future.